Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. Seneca. Welcome, fellow seekers of wisdom and tranquility. In our journey through life, we often find ourselves entangled in relationships that challenge our peace of mind and hinder our personal growth. Today, we delve into the profound teachings of Stoicism to explore 12 clear signs that it might be time to reassess and potentially cut contact with certain individuals in our lives. Stoicism, an ancient philosophy founded in Athens by Zeno of Citium, teaches us not just about enduring life's hardships, but about actively cultivating a life of virtue, wisdom, and inner peace. At its core, Stoicism emphasizes the importance of focusing on what we can control and accepting what we cannot. In the realm of relationships, this wisdom is invaluable. As we navigate through these 12 signs, remember that the goal isn't to hastily sever ties, but to make mindful, rational decisions that align with our values and contribute to our overall well-being. Let's embark on this journey of self-discovery and relationship evaluation together. Number 1. Persistent disrespect. One of the core principles of Stoic philosophy is the idea of inherent dignity. Every person has worth simply by being human. Respect in this context is not just about polite words or surface-level gestures. It's deeper. It's about recognizing and valuing the essence of a person. When someone disrespects you over and over again, they're not just disregarding common courtesy. They're fundamentally denying you the respect that Stoics believe is due to every individual. Now, this isn't about those occasional conflicts we all have. No relationship is perfect, and disagreements happen. But there's a difference between occasional friction and a persistent pattern of behavior that erodes your self-worth. The Stoics, especially thinkers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, would urge us to first take a step back. They'd say, examine yourself. Are you sure this isn't your own perception playing tricks on you? Is this disrespect real, or are your own insecurities magnifying something small into something large? It's important to make sure we aren't overreacting because of our own internal struggles. But if you've reflected and the pattern of disrespect is consistent, this is where the Stoic principles become clear. It's not enough to silently endure mistreatment. Stoicism doesn't teach us to be doormats. Instead, you are encouraged to address it directly. You owe it to yourself to speak your truth calmly and clearly, and to give the other person a chance to recognize their behavior and change. However, if you've done this, if you've communicated openly and the disrespect continues, this is when a Stoic would advise you to distance yourself. Why? Because your peace of mind, your inner tranquility, is worth protecting. As Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Persistent disrespect is one of those outside events. You can't control how others behave, but you can control how much of their negativity you allow into your life. If someone refuses to respect you despite your efforts, it's not only wise but necessary to cut ties. Imagine carrying a heavy weight on your back. At first, it's manageable, but over time, it wears you down. Persistent disrespect is like that. Each instance adds to the load until you find yourself drained, weighed down, and exhausted. The Stoics would remind you that it's okay to put down that weight. Cutting contact doesn't mean you harbor bitterness or anger. It's simply an act of self-preservation. You protect your dignity, you protect your peace, and most importantly, you maintain control over your own life. Remember, you deserve relationships where mutual respect is the foundation, anything less, and it might be time to walk away. Number 2. Negative impact on mental health. Mental tranquility, or ataraxia, is one of the most prized goals in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics believed that a peaceful mind is key to a virtuous life. But how often do we overlook the negative impact certain relationships have on our mental health? Stoicism teaches us to recognize when something disrupts this inner peace. A relationship that constantly triggers stress, anxiety, or other negative emotions is not just a difficult relationship. It's a relationship that stands in direct opposition to the Stoic ideal of living in harmony with nature and reason. Stoicism is not about turning a blind eye to emotional pain or pretending everything is fine. Instead, it invites us to approach these situations with a calm and rational mind. The Stoics often spoke about resilience in the face of adversity. They encouraged us to endure hardships, as long as those hardships were part of necessary challenges that help us grow. But, and this is key, they also taught the wisdom to discern between what is essential and what is simply causing unnecessary suffering. Ask yourself, is the relationship you're in causing you to consistently lose your peace of mind? Do you find yourself feeling drained, anxious, or mentally exhausted more often than not? If a relationship is constantly weighing on your mental health, it's time to step back and evaluate it from a Stoic perspective. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic thinkers, would ask you to think logically. Is this relationship helping you live a life of virtue, reason, and tranquility, or is it pulling you away from those ideals? The goal isn't to avoid challenges, but to avoid unnecessary suffering that serves no purpose. Stoicism doesn't encourage us to endure pain just for the sake of endurance. It reminds us that mental health is not something to be sacrificed in the name of a relationship. If every interaction leaves you feeling more emotionally unsettled, if your mind is constantly disturbed, it's a signal that something is out of alignment with your nature. As Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Yet when a relationship repeatedly stirs those negative emotions, it's no longer imaginary suffering, it's real, and it's draining you of your peace. The Stoics would advise you to approach this with reason. Examine the relationship. Is there room for growth, healing, and positive change? If so, communicate and seek that resolution. But if the relationship continues to disrupt your inner calm, it's likely a sign that it's time to distance yourself. Imagine mental tranquility as a still lake. Every negative relationship is like a stone being thrown into the water, creating ripples and disrupting the calm. You can't stop the stone from being thrown, but you can decide to walk away from the lake entirely. You deserve relationships that contribute to your peace, not destroy it. Ultimately, the Stoic approach is clear. Protect your mental well-being. If a relationship does not allow you to maintain your inner harmony, it's not aligned with the life of wisdom and virtue that Stoicism promotes. Walking away isn't a failure. It's a courageous act of self-preservation, rooted in the understanding that your mental health is sacred. Number 3. Misaligned core values. In Stoic philosophy, virtue is the highest good. Living according to one's values and principles is central to the Stoic way of life. But what happens when your core values clash with someone else's? When you're constantly in a state of inner conflict because the way they live challenges the way you live. At first glance, we might think differences are normal. It's part of being in relationships. And yes, Stoicism does teach us to be tolerant of others, to respect different opinions and perspectives. But there's a limit, a line where tolerance ends and self-compromise begins. When your core values, the very principles that define who you are constantly being questioned or compromised in a relationship, Stoicism encourages you to pause and reflect. Living in alignment with virtue means being true to yourself, your ethics, and your beliefs. And when a relationship forces you to bend or break those values repeatedly, it becomes a barrier to living virtuously. The Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, emphasize the importance of living with integrity. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If you are consistently surrounded by someone whose values clash deeply with yours, this friction can wear down your soul, your sense of self. It forces you into situations where you're constantly battling between maintaining the relationship and staying true to yourself. And that internal struggle, it chips away at your peace, your virtue. Epictetus reminds us that we cannot control other people's actions or beliefs. What we can control is how we respond to them. The Stoics would advise you to reflect on the nature of the conflict. Is this a difference you can tolerate without losing yourself? Or does it require you to compromise your most sacred principles? Tolerance is a virtue, but compromising your ethics is not. If a relationship requires you to act in ways that violate your integrity or constantly forces you to defend your core values, the Stoic approach would be to consider distance, not out of anger or disdain, but out of respect for your own moral compass. You can respect someone else's values while choosing not to be influenced by them if they lead you away from your path of virtue. Seneca, another Stoic philosopher, said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." In relationships, this can be translated as a warning not to hold on to relationships that deplete your moral or emotional resources. If you're craving peace, integrity, and authenticity, but find yourself constantly drained by misaligned values, you may be poor in spirit despite the connection. It's not about forcing others to share your worldview. Stoicism teaches that each person follows their own path. But if your values are so deeply opposed that you're constantly sacrificing parts of yourself, that's a sign that the relationship may not serve your highest good. Creating distance from someone whose values clash with yours isn't about judgment or blame. It's about preserving your integrity, your virtue, and your inner peace. You can wish them well, appreciate the lessons learned, and still walk away to protect what matters most, your alignment with the principles that guide your life. Number 4, energy vampire dynamics. We all know those people in our lives who seem to drain our energy, leaving us exhausted after every interaction. The Stoics, with their clear focus on self-discipline and personal growth, would call this an inefficient use of our most valuable resources, our time and energy. These relationships, often referred to as energy vampires, consume your mental and emotional resources without offering anything meaningful in return. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what is within our control. Our time, our energy, and how we choose to spend these are entirely in our hands. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." In other words, life is fleeting, and it's crucial to invest in what truly matters. Allowing someone to sap your energy, someone who doesn't reciprocate, doesn't uplift, and doesn't contribute to your growth, runs contrary to this Stoic wisdom. The Stoics would advise you to pause and assess. Why is this relationship draining you? Is it because the other person constantly demands your attention, your emotional labor, without giving back? Or could it be that you're struggling to set boundaries? Stoicism places a high value on personal responsibility. Epictetus reminds us, It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. If the issue lies in your inability to say no or set limits, that's where the Stoics would encourage you to start. Practice setting firm boundaries. Protect your energy with the same vigilance that you protect your time. If you're constantly giving without receiving, it's not only an imbalance, it's a distraction from your own path of personal growth and virtue. However, if you've set boundaries, communicated clearly, and still find yourself emotionally and mentally drained, this is when the Stoics would advise you to reevaluate the relationship itself. Some people, no matter how much we care about them, have a tendency to take more than they give. In Stoic philosophy, it's not virtuous to remain in relationships that drain your resources, leaving you with nothing to invest in your own well-being or growth. Seneca wisely pointed out, "We are always complaining that our days are few and acting as though there would be no end of them." Time, like energy, is finite. And if you spend it on relationships that deplete you without replenishing you, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to focus on what truly matters: your personal growth, your peace of mind, your pursuit of virtue. Energy vampires don't always mean harm. Sometimes they're unaware of the toll they take on others. But if, despite your efforts to communicate and set limits, the energy drain continues, Stoicism would tell you to consider creating distance, not out of resentment, but out of the wisdom that your energy must be preserved for things within your control, your growth, your purpose, your peace. Imagine your energy as a flame. Each interaction either feeds it or dims it. The Stoics would advise that you surround yourself with people who keep that flame burning bright, rather than those who smother it with their constant need for more. When you free yourself from these draining dynamics, you're free to focus on your own path and on those relationships that truly enrich your life. In the end, Stoicism teaches us to protect our energy as we would protect our virtue. If a relationship consistently depletes you, it's not aligned with the Stoic ideal of living wisely, productively, and in harmony with nature. Sometimes, walking away is the most Stoic thing you can do. Number 5, manipulation and deceit. Manipulation and deceit go directly against two of the most important Stoic values: honesty and integrity. For the Stoics, living truthfully is essential, not just in our words, but in how we conduct ourselves and approach life. When you're in a relationship where manipulation or deceit are present, you're dealing with a serious violation of these principles. Stoicism teaches us that one of the keys to a virtuous life is seeing things clearly, without distortion. Marcus Aurelius often spoke of the importance of seeing things as they truly are. But manipulation clouds our vision. It's designed to distort reality, to make you question your own judgment. And when deceit is involved, it becomes even harder to make rational decisions, something that Stoicism holds in the highest regard. The first thing a Stoic would tell you is to ensure you're seeing the situation objectively. Is what you're experiencing truly manipulation or deceit? Stoicism teaches us to be wary of jumping to conclusions based on emotion alone. Epictetus would remind you that your perceptions can be flawed. So take a step back. Look at the situation as if you were an outsider. Are you being manipulated, or could this be a misunderstanding? Is someone being deceitful, or is it a mistake? Once you've objectively confirmed that manipulation or deceit is at play, the Stoic response would be to address it directly. Marcus Aurelius would advise facing the issue with courage, speaking openly about what you've observed. Communication is key, and sometimes shining a light on these behaviors is enough to stop them. After all, Stoicism values transparency, and sometimes people manipulate out of insecurity or fear, not malice. But what if the manipulation continues even after you've called it out? What if the deceit becomes a pattern and the person shows no intention of changing? This is where Stoicism offers a clear directive. Walk away. Stoics believe in preserving their own integrity and rationality above all else. If someone in your life is repeatedly trying to control or deceive you, they are actively pulling you away from your virtuous path. Seneca once said, "Fidelity purchased with money, money can destroy." But manipulation and deceit corrupt something far more valuable: your ability to trust, to see things clearly, and to live in accordance with reason. Staying in a relationship where you're constantly questioning what's true will erode not only your peace but also your ability to make sound decisions. It's important to remember that manipulation is a form of control, and Stoicism teaches us to guard fiercely what is within our control: our mind, our actions, and our responses. When someone manipulates you, they're trying to take control of something that is yours alone, your freedom of choice. That's not just damaging to your emotional well-being, it's an attack on your autonomy, your ability to live rationally and virtuously. The Stoic path is one of clarity, truth, and reason. If manipulation and deceit are present in a relationship, you're no longer able to walk that path. The constant questioning, the doubt, the second-guessing, these are all distractions from the things that truly matter. Stoicism would suggest that it's better to distance yourself from people who distort your reality, even if it's painful, rather than staying in a situation that forces you to compromise your truth. By walking away from manipulation and deceit, you're not just protecting yourself from harm, you're safeguarding your ability to live a life grounded in virtue and reason. Number 6. Lack of trust. Trust is the bedrock of any meaningful relationship. Without it, the foundation begins to crumble, and what remains is a constant state of uncertainty. In Stoic philosophy, trust isn't just about faith in another person's actions or words. It's deeply connected to the virtue of justice and the idea of living in harmony with others. To the Stoics, trust represents a bond built on mutual respect and honesty, a reflection of the natural order of things. But what happens when trust is broken? When you find yourself doubting someone's intentions or questioning their every move? Stoicism teaches us to live in accordance with reason, and when trust begins to erode, it disrupts that harmony, leading to inner conflict. The first thing a Stoic would ask you to do is examine the root cause of this lack of trust. Marcus Aurelius might suggest reflecting inward, asking yourself, is this lack of trust based on something real, or are my own fears and suspicions clouding my judgment? Stoicism reminds us that not every doubt is justified, and sometimes our past experiences or insecurities can create barriers to trust, even when the other person hasn't done anything wrong. But if the lack of trust stems from past actions, betrayals, lies, or broken promises, then the Stoic approach becomes more nuanced. Stoicism places a strong emphasis on justice, fairness, and treating others as they deserve. If someone has repeatedly violated your trust, the Stoics would advise addressing it calmly and rationally. Epictetus would encourage open, honest communication, confronting the issue directly to see if trust can be rebuilt. However, Stoicism also acknowledges that not everything is within our control. You may want to rebuild trust, but if the other person continues to act in ways that violate it, the Stoics would remind you that you cannot control their behavior. What you can control is how much you allow their actions to affect your peace of mind. As Seneca said, to bear trials with a calm mind robs misfortune of its strength and burden. In other words, if you've made every effort to rebuild trust but the other person continues to break it, Stoicism would suggest it may be time to let go. Why? Because a relationship without trust forces you into a state of constant vigilance, questioning every word, every action. This is not a life lived in accordance with Stoic principles. It's a life of doubt, anxiety, and emotional turmoil, all of which pull you away from the Stoic ideal of inner tranquility. Lack of trust doesn't just damage the relationship, it damages you. It prevents you from fully engaging with the other person, from being vulnerable and open, which are essential to building meaningful connections. Marcus Aurelius spoke of living in harmony with others, but he also acknowledged that harmony requires mutual respect and honesty. Without trust, that harmony is impossible. At some point, the Stoics would encourage you to ask yourself, am I staying in this relationship because it's helping me grow, or am I staying out of fear of what I might lose? Stoicism teaches us to let go of things that no longer serve us. If trust has been irreparably damaged, it may be wiser to step away, to preserve your peace of mind and allow yourself to focus on relationships that are built on a foundation of trust. In the end, the Stoics would remind you that you cannot live a life of virtue, one that is grounded in reason, justice, and integrity, if you're constantly mired in distrust. If you've tried to rebuild trust and it hasn't worked, then walking away is not a failure. It's an act of self-respect, an acknowledgement that you deserve relationships where trust is not only present but foundational. Number 7. Abuse in any form. Abuse in any form, whether physical, emotional, verbal, or psychological, is a direct violation of the Stoic principles of justice, respect, and human dignity. The Stoics, who believe deeply in the inherent worth of every person, would never condone a relationship that strips away your sense of self-worth or subjects you to harm. In Stoicism, the virtue of justice compels us to treat all humans with respect and fairness. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most revered Stoic philosophers, wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." This teaches us that just because someone acts abusively does not mean we should tolerate or reciprocate such behavior. Stoicism promotes resilience, but it also promotes wisdom, self-respect, and the courage to remove ourselves from situations that degrade our dignity. Stoics believe in the importance of self-preservation and protecting oneself from harm. Abuse, regardless of its form, is a clear violation of your personal boundaries and your right to live with peace and respect. Resilience in Stoicism is not about enduring mistreatment for the sake of strength. Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But Stoicism never implies that one should endure abuse as a reaction. Instead, the Stoic response to abuse would be to act rationally and courageously by removing yourself from harm's way. In situations of abuse, Stoicism would encourage you to reflect deeply on the nature of the relationship. The Stoics emphasize that we are not responsible for the actions of others, but we are responsible for our own actions and reactions. If someone is abusing you, you cannot change their behavior. What you can do, as a Stoic, is to protect your own well-being by leaving the toxic environment. The Stoic virtue of courage plays a central role here. Courage isn't just about enduring hardships. It's about having the strength to stand up for yourself, to do what's right even when it's difficult. Removing yourself from an abusive situation is one of the most courageous actions you can take. It requires clarity of thought and a deep respect for your own dignity, both of which are pillars of Stoic philosophy. Seneca, another key Stoic thinker, said, "No one can live happily who has regard for himself alone and transforms everything into a question of his own utility. You must live for your neighbor. if you would live for yourself. This quote emphasizes the importance of mutual respect and care in relationships. Abuse destroys this fundamental principle. It is impossible to live in harmony with others when abuse is present, as it distorts the very nature of human interaction, turning it into a power struggle or a source of harm. Stoicism teaches us that every human being is deserving of respect, including yourself. To allow abuse to continue unchecked is to allow injustice to persist, which goes against the Stoic pursuit of a virtuous life. Protecting yourself from harm is not just an act of self-preservation, it's an act of justice and virtue. If you find yourself in an abusive relationship, the Stoic advice is clear: leave. This is not about revenge or anger, but about preserving your peace, your well-being, and your integrity. Abuse in any form is completely incompatible with a life lived according to Stoic principles. There is no place for it in the life of someone who seeks virtue, wisdom, and harmony. Remember, the Stoics valued self-control, but they never advocated for enduring mistreatment. Your dignity and peace are too valuable to sacrifice for a relationship that brings harm. Walking away from abuse is a rational and virtuous choice, one that aligns with the Stoic ideals of justice, respect, and courage. Number 8. Stagnation and lack of growth. For the Stoics, one of the primary goals in life is continuous self-improvement. Life is a journey of personal growth, of becoming the best version of ourselves through wisdom, discipline, and virtue. A relationship that hinders this growth, that keeps you in a state of stagnation, is not aligned with Stoic principles. It stands in the way of you fulfilling your potential and living a life of purpose. Stoicism teaches us that we should be constantly striving to improve ourselves. Seneca wisely noted, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." This means we must always be seeking ways to better ourselves, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But sometimes, relationships can hold us back. Perhaps it's a partner, a friend, or a family member who resists change, who is comfortable in the status quo, and subtly or overtly discourages you from pursuing your own growth. The Stoic approach to such situations would first be one of reflection. Marcus Aurelius often emphasized the importance of introspection, of understanding where our own motivations lie. Before distancing yourself from someone, the Stoics would advise you to examine the situation carefully. Are you truly being held back, or is it possible that you're avoiding the hard work of growth? Sometimes we project our frustrations onto others when the real issue lies within us. If you find that the relationship is indeed hindering your growth, Stoicism encourages you to take action, but not hastily. Epictetus would suggest trying to introduce growth-oriented activities into the relationship first. Can you inspire change in the other person by setting an example? Can you gently guide the relationship toward something that fosters mutual growth? Stoicism places great value on patience and perseverance, especially when dealing with others. But what if your efforts fail? What if, despite your best attempts, the relationship continues to stifle your growth? At this point, the Stoics would remind you of your responsibility to yourself. Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one. These words from Marcus Aurelius emphasize the Stoic belief that your personal growth is your highest duty. If a relationship consistently holds you back, prevents you from pursuing your goals, or dampens your desire to improve, it may be time to consider creating distance. Stagnation is the enemy of virtue. To the Stoics, living virtuously means actively working toward becoming wiser, more disciplined, and more compassionate. Staying in a relationship that keeps you from that path is not only detrimental to your personal development, it's a disservice to your potential. You were not meant to stay stagnant. You were meant to grow, to evolve, to become a better version of yourself each day. Seneca once said, "Life without purpose is mere existence." If a relationship is keeping you from pursuing your purpose, then Stoicism would argue that you are merely existing rather than living. You have a duty, not only to yourself, but to those around you, to continue growing and improving. A stagnant relationship drains your energy, your focus, and your ability to live in accordance with reason and virtue. Walking away from a relationship that stifles growth isn't a failure. In fact, it can be an act of great courage and wisdom. It's a recognition that your journey of self-improvement is too important to be held back. And while it may be difficult to let go, the Stoics would remind you that sometimes letting go is necessary to make space for growth. At the end of the day, Stoicism is about fulfilling your potential and living a life that is in harmony with nature and reason. If a relationship consistently prevents you from growing into the person you're meant to be, then walking away isn't just an option. It's a step toward living a more virtuous, meaningful life. Number 9. Consistent selfishness. Stoicism places a strong emphasis on contributing to the greater good and living harmoniously with others. It's a philosophy that teaches us to not only improve ourselves, but to consider the needs of those around us. A consistently selfish partner, friend, or family member, someone who places their own needs and desires above everything else, stands in direct opposition to these values. Selfishness is a roadblock to the Stoic ideal of living a life of virtue. Stoics believe that part of living virtuously is understanding that we are all connected, that our actions impact the people around us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee." This speaks to the Stoic idea that individual well-being is tied to the well-being of the whole community. When someone consistently acts selfishly in a relationship, they are disregarding this interconnectedness and disrupting the balance needed for harmony. If you find yourself in a relationship where selfishness is a persistent issue, the Stoic approach would first encourage reflection and open communication. Epictetus would advise you to approach the situation with reason and empathy rather than anger or frustration. Ask yourself, is this selfishness a product of ignorance? Does the other person realize the impact their actions are having? Sometimes people act selfishly out of habit or lack of awareness rather than malice. The Stoics would likely advise you to address this selfishness directly. As Marcus Aurelius suggested, waste no time in speaking what you think, but speak it with kindness and conviction. This means having a calm, rational conversation with the person, explaining how their behavior affects the relationship. By doing so, you give them the opportunity to change, to become more aware of their actions and how they impact you. However, Stoicism also teaches us that we cannot control the behavior of others, only our own responses. If you've communicated your concerns and the selfishness continues, despite your efforts, the Stoic perspective becomes clear. It may be time to reconsider the relationship. A consistently selfish partner not only disrupts the harmony of the relationship, but can also hinder your ability to practice virtue. Seneca once said, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve." A relationship based on consistent selfishness does neither. It does not allow for mutual growth, and it can leave you feeling drained and frustrated, constantly giving without receiving anything in return. This imbalance can prevent you from focusing on your own development and your ability to contribute positively to others and society. Living virtuously means considering the needs of others, being generous with your time, energy, and attention, but not to the point where you sacrifice your own well-being or allow yourself to be taken advantage of. The Stoics would encourage you to maintain relationships that foster mutual respect, where both parties are invested in each other's well-being. If selfishness dominates the relationship and leaves little room for growth or balance, it may be time to create distance. The Stoic virtue of justice teaches us to treat others fairly, but it also reminds us that we deserve to be treated fairly in return. A consistently selfish person is not contributing to a just relationship. They are prioritizing their own needs at the expense of yours. Over time, this dynamic can erode your sense of balance, making it difficult to live a life of harmony, generosity, and virtue. Stoicism would suggest that if selfishness persists, despite your best efforts to address it, it may be wise to step back. By doing so, you not only protect your own peace of mind, but also free yourself to engage in relationships that uplift rather than drain you. Walking away from a consistently selfish partner isn't an act of selfishness on your part. It's an act of wisdom and self-respect. It aligns with the Stoic principle of living virtuously, not just for yourself but for the benefit of others as well. Number 10. Toxic communication patterns. Communication is deeply connected to the virtues of wisdom and justice. The way we communicate with others is not only a reflection of our character, but also a tool for achieving harmony and clarity in our relationships. When communication becomes toxic, filled with blame, hostility, or manipulation, it disrupts our inner peace, clouding our ability to think clearly and act rationally. Such patterns of communication are entirely incompatible with the Stoic ideal of living virtuously. Stoicism teaches that effective communication should be based on reason, respect, and empathy. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most prominent Stoic philosophers, emphasized the importance of self-control in our interactions, writing, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger." Before reacting to toxic communication, the Stoics would advise you to first look inward. Are your own words or actions contributing to the negativity? Are you reacting impulsively out of frustration or fear, rather than responding with calm reason? The Stoics would encourage you to address toxic communication patterns by taking personal responsibility for your own behavior. Epictetus taught that while we cannot control how others behave, we can control how we respond. In the face of a toxic conversation, instead of escalating the situation, the Stoic approach is to stay calm, maintain control over your emotions, and speak with clarity and wisdom. This can help de-escalate the tension and create a more respectful dialogue. However, what if you've done your part, stayed calm, controlled your reactions, and communicated thoughtfully, but the other person continues to engage in toxic communication? If, despite your best efforts, the communication remains hostile, manipulative, or demeaning, the Stoics would likely suggest that maintaining such a relationship could be detrimental to your peace of mind and mental clarity. Toxic communication patterns not only disrupt the flow of reason, but can also drag you into a cycle of negativity that erodes your sense of tranquility. Stoicism places great emphasis on maintaining inner peace, or ataraxia. Constantly engaging in toxic conversations is like pouring fuel onto a fire that burns away your sense of calm and disrupts your ability to think rationally. Seneca wisely advised, It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Engaging in endless arguments or trying to change someone's toxic communication style can feel like wasted time and energy. The Stoic approach would be to recognize when communication is no longer productive and instead direct your energy toward more constructive pursuits. If toxic communication persists, it may be necessary to distance yourself to preserve your own mental well-being and clarity of thought. This does not mean abandoning the relationship at the first sign of conflict. Stoicism encourages patience and understanding. It means recognizing when repeated efforts to improve communication are unsuccessful and when the toxicity is causing harm to your mental and emotional health. Toxic communication also stands in opposition to the Stoic virtue of justice. In any relationship, both parties should feel heard and respected. When communication becomes a tool for manipulation, blame, or hostility, it disrupts the balance of fairness and mutual respect. The Stoics believed deeply in the importance of fairness, not only in how we treat others, but in how we allow ourselves to be treated. If a relationship's communication patterns consistently undermine your sense of fairness, respect, and reason, the Stoics would likely advise that it's time to reconsider your involvement. Walking away from toxic communication isn't a sign of defeat. It's a step toward protecting your peace of mind and preserving your ability to live according to reason and virtue. Stoicism teaches us to value clear, respectful, and rational communication. When a relationship consistently fails to meet these standards, distancing yourself may be necessary, not out of anger or resentment, but as a way to protect your inner tranquility and maintain your commitment to living a virtuous life. Seneca once said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Sometimes that delay might mean stepping back from a relationship where toxic communication dominates, giving yourself the space to restore clarity and peace. Number 11. Disregard for personal boundaries. Respecting personal boundaries is not only a matter of courtesy, but essential for maintaining autonomy and self-respect. Boundaries are an expression of your ability to make rational decisions and to protect what is within your control, your own actions, thoughts, and emotions. When someone repeatedly disregards your personal boundaries, it undermines your sense of self and your ability to live in alignment with reason and virtue. The Stoics valued personal agency highly. Epictetus famously said, "Some things are within our control and some things are not." Our boundaries are among the things we can control, as they reflect our choices about how we wish to live and interact with others. When someone crosses those boundaries, they are not respecting your autonomy or your right to make decisions about your own life. This disregard can erode your sense of peace and undermine your efforts to live rationally and virtuously. Stoicism would first encourage you to approach this situation with clarity and directness. Marcus Aurelius emphasized the importance of honest and open communication, especially when addressing conflicts. Before jumping to conclusions, ask yourself whether your boundaries were clearly communicated. Have you made your expectations known? And are those expectations reasonable? Sometimes, misunderstandings occur when boundaries are not explicitly stated. Once you've ensured that your boundaries have been communicated clearly, the next step is to reinforce them firmly but kindly. Epictetus urged us to keep constant guard over yourself and your actions, reminding us that it is our responsibility to maintain our own standards. In this case, it means standing by your boundaries and calmly explaining their importance when they are crossed. A boundary is only effective if it is upheld, and the Stoics would advise you to remain consistent in protecting your personal space, both physical and emotional. However, what if your boundaries are repeatedly violated despite clear communication? If someone consistently disregards your limits, it signals a lack of respect for your autonomy and a refusal to acknowledge your personal agency. This is a serious issue in Stoic thought because it disrupts your ability to live according to reason and make rational choices about your own life. Stoicism teaches that our relationships should enhance, not diminish, our ability to live virtuously. If someone consistently crosses your boundaries, they are infringing on your right to live freely and with dignity. As Seneca said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." If someone's behavior prevents you from being the master of your own life, whether through manipulation, coercion, or disregard for your needs, then Stoicism would suggest that this relationship is not conducive to your growth or well-being. The Stoics would also remind you that it is not your responsibility to control the behavior of others, only your response to it. If a person refuses to respect your boundaries, despite your best efforts to communicate and reinforce them, it may be time to reconsider the relationship. Continuing to engage with someone who consistently disregards your boundaries can lead to frustration, resentment, and a loss of inner peace, none of which are compatible with the Stoic ideal of mental tranquility. Creating distance from someone who disregards your boundaries is not an act of hostility or rejection. It is an act of self-respect. Stoicism teaches that we must guard our own peace of mind and protect our ability to live in accordance with virtue. By distancing yourself from those who do not respect your autonomy, you are preserving your capacity to make rational decisions and maintain harmony within yourself. Number 12, lack of mutual accountability. Personal responsibility is one of the cornerstones of Stoic philosophy. For the Stoics, being accountable for one's actions, thoughts, and decisions is essential to living a virtuous life. This principle extends into our relationships. Mutual accountability is crucial for fostering growth, harmony, and trust. When this balance is absent, when one person takes responsibility while the other evades it, the relationship becomes misaligned with the Stoic pursuit of virtue. Stoicism emphasizes that before we hold others accountable, we must first turn inward and examine our own behavior. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." In other words, before pointing out someone else's failure to be accountable, we must ask ourselves whether we are practicing accountability in our own lives. Are we taking responsibility for our actions? Are we making efforts to be reliable and just in the relationship? The Stoics would suggest that by leading through example, we might inspire accountability in others. However, what happens when the other person consistently fails to take responsibility for their actions, even after you've demonstrated and communicated the importance of accountability? The Stoics would remind us that we cannot control the actions of others, only our own thoughts, choices, and responses. If someone repeatedly avoids responsibility and refuses to acknowledge their role in conflicts or challenges, it may be a sign that the relationship is no longer contributing to mutual growth and harmony. Epictetus taught that we should not tie our happiness to external events or people, but to how well we manage ourselves. He said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." When faced with a lack of accountability from another person, it is crucial to recognize that while you can influence their behavior through communication, you cannot force them to change. If accountability is lacking despite your efforts to address it, you might need to reassess whether this relationship aligns with your values and goals for personal growth. A relationship lacking mutual accountability can hinder your own practice of virtue. As Seneca wisely advised, associate with people who are likely to improve you. If someone consistently avoids responsibility, it can create an unbalanced dynamic where you are left carrying the weight of the relationship. This imbalance not only causes frustration, but also distracts you from focusing on your own development and well-being. Stoicism teaches that a virtuous life is one where we strive for balance, fairness, and mutual respect. Moreover, the absence of accountability from the other person can lead to a breakdown in trust and communication. Accountability is the foundation upon which strong, healthy relationships are built. Without it, misunderstandings, resentment, and disconnection can take root. The Stoics would likely advise that if the lack of accountability persists, despite your efforts to address it, distancing yourself from the relationship may be necessary to protect your own peace of mind and preserve your ability to live according to reason and virtue. That said, Stoicism does not teach us to avoid all difficult relationships. Challenges, including those found in relationships, are opportunities for growth. However, Stoicism also teaches us to make wise, rational decisions based on what contributes to our overall well-being. If a lack of mutual accountability is consistently present and negatively impacting your peace, growth, and ability to practice virtue, it may be time to consider creating distance. As we conclude this exploration of Stoic wisdom in relationships, remember that the decision to distance yourself from someone should not be taken lightly. The Stoic approach isn't about avoiding all difficult relationships, but about making wise, virtuous choices that contribute to our growth and well-being. Seneca wisely said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." This doesn't mean seeking perfection in others, but rather cultivating relationships that challenge us to grow, support our well-being, and align with our values. Cutting contact doesn't always mean a dramatic, permanent severance. Sometimes it means creating healthy boundaries, reducing interaction, or taking a temporary break to gain perspective. The key is to approach these decisions with wisdom, courage, and self-respect. As you reflect on your relationships, remember to also turn that reflection inward. Are you embodying the qualities you seek in others? Are you contributing positively to your relationships? Stoicism teaches us that true change begins with ourselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey of Stoic relationship wisdom. May you find the courage to nurture relationships that uplift you, the wisdom to distance yourself from those that don't, and the serenity to navigate the complexities of human connections with grace and virtue. Until next time, stay mindful, stay stoic.